So this is going to be about the law of cosines. So just like the law of sines, the law of cosines can be used to find side lengths and angle measurements for any triangle, not just the right triangle. So the formula for law of cosines is a bit different than law of sines. So if we're looking at this side here, side A, we're going to say that a squared is equal to b squared plus c squared, and little b and little c are side measurements as well, minus 2 times little b times little c times the cosine of capital A. And we can say b squared is equal to a squared plus c squared minus 2 times ac times the cosine of capital B. And then we can say c squared is a squared plus b squared minus 2 times ab times the cosine of capital C. It's really important to remember these formulas and to also remember that the capital letters are representing angles and the lowercase letters are representing sides. So let's try to do this first example. So we're going to look here at number 1, and we have this angle X. If we look across from angle X, we have 65 degrees. So that is our angle and X is our side. So we're going to say that X squared is equal to the other two sides, 7 squared plus 12 squared minus 2 times 7 times 12 times the cosine of 65, because that is the angle that is across from X. So now we can try our best to solve for X. So we're going to have X squared is equal to, let's simplify this a little bit, 49. 7 squared is 49. 12 squared is 144. If you multiply these, you're going to get minus 168, because 2 times 7 times 12 is 168, times the cosine of 65. Now, the easiest thing to do, in my opinion, is to figure out what this is so you don't have to deal with the trig function at the end. So if you do 168 times the cosine of 65, you're going to have also combine these. So if you have 49 plus 144, that is 193. And then if you do 168 times the cosine of 65, you're going to have 70.99. But if you round that to, you can just round that to 71. So 193 minus, don't forget the minus sign, minus 71. And 193 minus 71 is 122. So you're going to have X squared is equal to 122. Now, X is not by itself, it is squared. And in order to get rid of that, we need to do the opposite operation, which is to take the square root of both sides. And if you take the square root, you'll get that X is equal to 11.04. But if we're going to round that to just the nearest tenth, it's just going to be 11.0. And that is X. So remember, try to find the angle. There's only one angle in the triangle anyways. So 65 is opposite the X. So you're going to start with your missing side. X squared is equal to the other two sides minus 2 times those side measurements times the cosine of that angle. Let's try to do one more example. It helps sometimes if you label it. So I'm going to try and label. I'm going to go ahead and label. It helps if you label, let's say, this is A, this is B, and this is C. It can help you figure out how to write the equation. So let's just say little a squared b squared plus c squared minus 2bc times the cosine of capital A. And this is always the angle inside the triangle. So opposite this, that's 108 degrees. That's going to be our capital A. So if we have our little a, we already labeled A, B, and C. So we have x squared is, our B is 20. So we're going to have 20 squared plus 25 squared minus 2 times 20 times 25 times the cosine of 108. All right, let's simplify this because there's a lot of numbers. So you have x squared is 400. 20 squared is 400. 25 squared is 625 minus 2 times 20 times 25. That's going to give us 1,000 times the cosine of 108. All right, let's try and simplify this even more. If we combine these, we're going to get x squared is 1,025 minus 1,000 times the cosine of 108 is actually negative 309. Now when you have minus a negative, that turns into a positive. So we're going to actually be adding these. And you can say that x squared is equal to 1,025 plus 309, which is going to give you 1,334. Now we need to take the square root of both sides. So we're going to have x is equal to 36.5. So it's a little simpler when you label, because if you don't label, you might get confused what to put where. So it would have been the same if you change these around. Just know that this right here, so A, the one in the front, always has to be the missing angle. So x has to be A, because that's the missing side. It always has to be the missing side. So x is going to be A because that's the side that we're looking for. But you could have labeled this B and you could have labeled this C. It doesn't matter. You would have gotten the same answer. Or if you called this one C and you called this one B, you're going to get the same answer. So long as this is always A, because that is the side that's missing. So let's try another example. This time, if you notice, x is no longer outside the triangle. It is inside the triangle. And what do we do when x is inside the triangle? We are going to end up using inverse trig. But we're not going to use it until the end. So let's write our formula. We have a squared is equal to b squared plus c squared minus 2bc times the cosine of A. Now remember, A is an angle, right? And this time our angle is actually x. So little a, little b, and little c are side measurements. And this time, in order to figure out which one is A, we need to remember that little a is always opposite. Little a is always opposite big A. So if A is the angle, which is right here, we know that little a has to be opposite. So that means 7 is A. And then B and C, you can label it however you want to. So you can say that 12 is B, and we can say that 11 is C. Either way, you're going to get the same answer as if you put 11 as B and 12 as C. But 7 has to be A. And it has to be A because it's what's across from our angle. So we're going to say that A squared, which is 7 squared, is equal to 12 squared plus 11 squared minus 2 times 12 times 11 times the cosine of x, because x is our angle. 7 squared is 49, 12 squared is 144, and 11 squared is 121. 2 times 12 times 11, we're going to get 264 times the cosine of x. Let's simplify this a little bit more. We're going to have 49 is equal to 144 plus 121. That's going to give us 265 minus 264 times the cosine of x. Now, don't try to subtract these two because they are not like terms. This has the cosine of x attached to it. So what we're going to do instead is, let me just erase the whole thing. What we're going to do instead is we're going to subtract the 265 from both sides. So let me write this over. We're going to have 265 minus 264 times the cosine of x. So we can subtract 265 from both sides. This cancels, and we have negative 216 is equal to negative, don't forget the minus sign, negative 264 times the cosine of x. Now we need to get x by itself, so I'm going to divide both sides by negative 264. These cancel, and on this side we're just left with the cosine of x is equal to negative over a negative, that turns into a positive. And it's easier if you put this in a calculator and you get a decimal, and you're going to get 0. So put that in the calculator, and you're going to get 0.8182. Now we can finally use inverse trig. You can't use inverse trig until you get to this final point right here. When you get to this point, then you can use inverse trig. So you can say that x is equal to the inverse cos of 0.8182. And if you put that in a calculator, you're going to get 35.1 degrees. Let's try another example. So again, x is inside the triangle. Well, before I do that, let me write my equation. We know it's inside the triangle, so we're going to use inverse trig. But again, you're not using inverse trig until the end. Here's my equation. A squared is equal to b squared plus c squared minus 2bc times the cosine of a. So we have little a, we have capital A. Capital A is going to be our angle x, and in order to figure out what's little a, we need to look opposite our x, and opposite our x is going to be the 35. So here we have 35. And then you can label this to be b squared and c squared, or you can call this 24, you can call that b, and you can call the 16 c. Either way, you're going to get the same answer. So our a squared, we already said that's 35. So we're going to have 35 squared is equal to 16 squared plus 24 squared minus 2 times 16 times 24 times the cosine of x. 35 squared, we're going to have 1,225, and that's equal to 16 squared, which is 256, plus 24 squared, which is 576, minus 2 times 16 times 24. We're going to get 768. So minus 768 times the cosine of x. From here, we're just going to clean up all this algebra, all of these numbers. We have 1,225 is equal to 256 plus 576. That's going to give us 832 minus 768 times the cosine of x. Now, again, you can't subtract these two, 832 minus 768. You can't subtract them because you have the cosine of x attached to the 768. So instead, we're going to subtract 832 from here and 832 from here. And the reason why we're subtracting is because the 832 is positive. If it were to have been negative, we would have been adding. But it's negative. It's going to be negative 832. So we're subtracting. But it's positive. So we're going to be subtracting 832 from both sides. So 1,225 minus 832 is going to give us 393 is equal to, these are canceled. So it's equal to negative 768 times the cosine of x. We still need to get x by itself, so we're going to divide now by negative 768. If you put this in a calculator, you are going to get, put this in the calculator, and you are going to get negative 0.5117, and that's going to be equal to the cosine of x. Now you can use inverse trig, and you can say that x is equal to the inverse cosine of negative 0.5117, which means x is 120.8 degrees. So with these, please make sure you're always looking at which one is opposite the x angle in order for you to figure out which is going to be your leading number, what's going to be your little a. That's all for Law of Cosines.